lady we have on the line with us right now. Always love to have her. She a great writer for The Spectator. That would be Amber Athey, who has been covering this story. Amber, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Hey, what's up, Amber?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
So, Amber, a lot of questions to get to with you in a short period of time. But first, since you've been covering the story, what is your reaction to the fact that this police officer has been taken into custody and arrested?
Well, based on the video, it seems like this was the right thing to do, and perhaps it even took longer than it should have. Obviously, we don't know what the results of the autopsy were on George Floyd, and we don't know if there was other context outside of the video, but it's hard to imagine what context could possibly exonerate someone who had their knee on someone's neck for close to 10 minutes as bystanders were begging him to stop, watching the life leave his body. It was truly horrifying. And so I think that the fact that this guy has been arrested was really just long overdue.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think this should have happened sooner. But let me take it a step further and ask you this. Do you think it's a matter of time before these three other officers are charged with something? What are your thoughts on that?
They probably will. I've seen the reaction from people who are protesting in Minneapolis, and they've already moved on to the other three officers, so they want to see them arrested as well. In terms of the protests that are going on, there's obviously all this looting and rioting, which is unacceptable, but you can't say it didn't get results, because as soon as all of this started happening, that was apparently when they decided to make the arrest.
True. All right. So let's move on to a couple tweets that Donald Trump's put out last night that I think, at the very least, were controversial. One of those tweets has been taken down by Twitter, where he uses the term thugs. And then he says a quote from back in 1967. As you know, a Miami police chief declared war on African Americans back in the rioting in 67. The same quote that Trump used, which is, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. A lot of people are saying that is condoning violence. What do you say to that?
I thought it was an inappropriate thing to tweet and that it was unnecessarily divisive. I agree with the president's decision to send in the National Guard because the local leadership has been completely ineffective in dealing with this situation. You've seen police officers run out of their own precincts. The Minnesota State National Guard went in and was trying to quell some of the protests as well as giving support to firefighters, but clearly they haven't been able to really stop the rioting and the looting that's been going on. So at this point, there has to be some type of federal response. But the president's tweet implies, of course, that people who are rioting deserve to get shot, and that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be trying to escalate violence any further. We should be trying to stamp it out entirely.
Again, Amber, I could not agree with you more on what you just said. I agree with the fact that the president is sending in the National Guard. I agree with the fact that the mayor has just completely screwed this whole thing up. To allow people to burn down buildings and local businesses is a joke. And I'm glad that you, and I agree with you, that the president needs to be held to a higher standard. He can't be inciting violence. And I think that's a reason why, a good reason why Twitter has taken that down. But Amber, I want to give you some breaking news that just came out. We are now learning that the officer that was taken into custody has now been charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter charges. Now, that was my question. Was it going to be a murder charge? So I want to get your reaction to that. Not only a manslaughter charge, but third-degree murder. This is serious. You could spend a lot of time, maybe the rest of your life, behind bars if he's convicted. What are your thoughts on that, Amber?
Right. Well, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so it's hard for me to say whether or not those charges are justified. But based on the video, again, he obviously should have been charged with something, and it'll be up to a jury to decide if those are warranted.
You mentioned how the riot was, and the looting was obviously successful. And in those riots and looting, not only was an AutoZone destroyed and a Target and some of these multi-billion-dollar businesses, but almost 200 businesses were burnt down last night, and a lot of those were small businesses. And I would argue that this taking place, without the riots, Derek Chauvin was going to be arrested in custody at some point. I don't know how long that would have taken, but an FBI investigation was already opened up. A DOJ investigation was opened up. I would argue that this sets a poor precedent and makes people think that rioting is okay in moving the needle. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a fair takeaway from this. And it's important to note, too, that one of the reasons that Trump was apparently slow to send in the National Guard is because members of his administration and his advisors were warning him that if he did this, he would lose support among the Black community. And I don't think that's accurate, because we've seen these videos of young Black men who are actually arming themselves in the hopes of protecting these local small businesses. They don't want to see their community burned any more than anyone else does. And so I think it's incumbent upon the president to recognize that fact and protect people who want to be able to live in their city peacefully. They don't want to see things like stores burned down. They don't want to see low-income housing burned down. And that's something that he needs to deal with and be able to push back on his advisors and do the right thing.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Amber Athey from The Spectator. She has been covering this story from day one since this video circulated. Jason Stein, our producer, you have a little bit of information you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, we're going to have to clarify it, but I'm wondering if CNN is kind of conflating third-degree murder and manslaughter. They may be one in the same. I'm not sure. But third-degree murder generally is defined as a homicide committed with the intention of causing bodily harm, but not necessarily death. And usually when you have a first or second degree, there's an intent there. I wanted to kill the person. So yeah. I'm not sure if in this case they're charging him with third degree and manslaughter, or if they're one and the same. But we'll have to figure that out. But generally, we're talking about the absence of malice.
Sure. Well, it's a very serious
or the absence
crime.
of intent, I should say.
Very serious crime. And as Amber said, she wouldn't be surprised if these three other officers were charged with something. But certainly it starts with this officer. Okay, so Amber, now let's talk about reaction. Obviously, I don't condone, and I think it's disgusting what these people are doing with the riots, burning down buildings. The mayor allowing, basically, let's just call it for what it is. The mayor basically said, all right, we don't want anybody else to get hurt or die, so let's just let people burn down the buildings of the precinct and small business. I think it's disgusting. How does this happen? I mean, even in Ferguson, from what I recall, there was rioting and there was looting, but they weren't burning down a bunch of businesses. How does the mayor allow this to happen?
Yeah, well, when you listen to some of the mayor's speeches, it sounds like he's more interested in sharing these woke platitudes than he actually is in taking care of his city. And the only reason that this would be allowed to occur is if either the police were ordered to stand down, or for some reason they were not supposed to be stopping these people from going into these stores and causing chaos. And that's, again, exactly the reason why Trump should be stepping in with the National Guard, because the local leadership here has been so ineffective. This has been a failure of Minnesota law enforcement, really from top to bottom. It starts with the death of George Floyd and the actions of that officer. Then it goes to the DA, taking him so long to arrest and charge this officer. You have the local police apparently not being told to protect businesses or homes from being looted and burned. And then you have state troopers actually going in and arresting CNN reporters instead of focusing on the people who were throwing incendiary devices or rocks at police officers.
Exactly.
So the entire thing is just a complete utter chaos. It's utter chaos. And it's clearly a problem, not just of the people who are choosing to riot, but how the city is choosing to respond to it.
It looks like an absolute collapse of Democratic-led leadership, because you could actually add that, Senator Amy Klobuchar, when she was a prosecutor, she declined to press charges against Derek Chauvin and other police officers before any of this happened. Do you think that what has taken place with Fry and Walls and the police department, that this will help Minnesota go red in 2020?
I think it depends really on Trump's reaction, how quickly he's able to get this thing in order, and what his reaction to the police brutality is, because this is something where Trump needs to, and I just wrote about this in The Spectator, this is something where Trump needs to demonstrate that he's still the law and order president that he promised he would be when he was running back in 2015. And law and order does not mean just enforcing order, such as sending the National Guard in and quashing these riots, but it also means making sure that the law applies equally and justly to every American. So when we're constantly seeing things like what happened with this officer in Minneapolis, there needs to be some type of administrative recognition of police brutality and what exactly this country can do to ensure this type of thing isn't happening as often as we see it.
No question. Amber, you do a great job with The Spectator. Always appreciate it when you take some time to join us. Keep up the great work. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Stay safe, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Amber.
Amber does a great job. I really enjoy having her on. Amber Athey from The Spectator. So.